Morning, gents.
Morning, everybody. Yeah,
Another
so
week. Time for the pod.
it is. Man, it has been a week. I don't know for you guys, but, I was told Mercury's in retrograde, and I'm just blaming that.
Well,
Mm.
I know our listening audience is gripped by your leaf blower ban situation. Last night was your
Oh,
public meeting. You sent a message at 9:45 at night when, full disclosure, I was horizontal. We'll just say that. And you said public comment was still going.
yeah.
Here
It
you
was
are.
I am here physically, mentally, and might
Spiritually.
take a little while to catch up.
Yeah.
And spiritually. I'm here spiritually too,
Okay.
right?
But emotionally, not yet.
Not yet. Not
Okay.
yet. Yeah, public comment started around 7:30, ended around 10:30, so 3 hours public comment.
And
When
that's time public comment? Like, wait, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, something like that?
3-minute beeper.
3-minute beeper. Okay.
We told the
Strictly
town.
enforced.
Well, yes,
You get the hockey
we
buzzer at the end.
you know what we did?
Yeah.
The previous meetings, this is our third meeting on it, between advertisement and adoption. And we try to be lenient with the public comment. We don't usually enforce it, but after the last two meetings, we strictly enforced it. It was bad.
I used to have a
in terms of-
board president after long, like just hours long public comments, when we finally would sort of move to the next step of the meeting, he would say, I'd like to take this minute to congratulate everyone in the audience, our speakers, listening board members for surviving the public comment portion of the meeting. And now we're all going to collectively move on.
Well,
And just
I like
add a
that.
little levity.
I had a guy who would say, if we had a big issue and a lot of members in the audience, he'd let one or two come up and speak. And then he would just say, poll by show of hands, how many people are going to say that same thing? And the hands would go up. Like, all right, well, you guys don't have to. You can, but you don't have to come up. We've
That's pretty
taken
funny.
tally, and it's kind of a big room ditto.
Yeah,
Yep,
that's
ditto.
pretty
What they said, what he said.
I mean,
That's pretty
between
good.
the three meetings we talked about it, we pegged almost 9 hours of public comment, which
It's pretty good.
is now the record in Lower Marion Township on a single topic. But let me tell you, I felt so bad because it was also our first public hearing for the budget for 26, and there was a resident there who had no interest in leaf blowers, who just wanted to talk about the budget, and I
That's
felt so bad for that individual because it was about 11 o'clock by the time we got to the budget conversation.
Yeah, that's really hard. I always feel bad when those situations happen.
Yeah, but
What was the inception of this? Was it resident driven? Did it come from your board member? Was it like
a little bit of both.
petitioned? Okay.
Our board does a priorities every year, and this has been one that has been lingering on the list, so to speak, for a while. And,
I think you're the first Pennsylvania municipality to engage in a leaf blower ban.
We are.
You're the pioneers here.
well,
Yeah.
trust me, we know.
Leading edge.
Yeah.
And we've been told multiple times that no other municipality has this ban.
Well, the first one out of the gate always gets bloody, Brandon.
I know. Well, the interesting thing is we had individuals from other communities come, and say, "Oh yeah, we're going to do this in our community." Which, if those communities want it, but not
Also, a good week
necessarily
here
applicable.
in Middletown. The budget was officially launched Monday. I couldn't be more proud of
Woohoo!
our budget team and department heads for all the work they put in and launching the proposed budget. One that's getting a lot of attention. So it's going to be a fun next few weeks.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
I've been catching some of your what you were telling us about last week, the budget shorts.
Behind the
I
budget
guess.
Behind the budget, yes. Our
Behind the
social
budget.
media reels
All your
going
chief.
into it.
title, by the way.
Thank you. Thank
Give
you.
a
I
raise
appreciate
to
that.
whoever did that.
Our
Although
PIO
I
is
saw
fantastic.
Nick's doing his thing and he's walking backwards and he's going towards this wall. I'm like, Nick, no, Nick, like a guy like shouting in the
No,
movie
don't
theater.
hit
It's
it.
like the guys behind, don't back into the wall.
Friends of ours were like, how could you make your assistant township manager walk backwards? Are you serious? I'm like, it was actually his idea. It wasn't me. Because the idea
Yeah.
was that he was inviting you into board chambers where we're going to discuss it.
He was graceful.
He did a nice job. He's a little salty. My video has 3,000 views. His has 1,000 views.
Just tell him.
And
Time.
900 of those are me because I just can't get enough.
Yeah.
It's just Dave on repeat.
That's right. We had a resident call in who said, I'm not going to attend your budget hearings. I feel like I have everything I need to know between what you publish on the website and the videos you're releasing. And I said, great. I said, you're welcome to come to the meetings, but I'm glad you're enjoying what we're doing.
And that's great.
Yeah, that's
I
a real
mean,
nice compliment.
that's really
He said,
nice,
"Now I got to
especially
go over to Lower Marion. I hear they're having a meeting tonight too."
no, no, no.
That's too
You know,
funny.
we're done, but well, thanks, you know, thanks for coming on, guys. You know, I look forward to this every week. So
Highlight of
highlight.
the week.
I
Yep.
know it is. I treat it as equal, you know, getting to see you all and banter a little bit, but equal parts therapy session too, right?
That's true.
So, for listeners, we should get started. Welcome to Generation on the Rise. I'm Brandon. I'm joined here with my good buddies Dave and Eden for another episode because we're willing to go there talking about local government and the next generation. This week, we're talking about work life balance, you know, kind of timely given the banter that we just engaged in. I told the gents before we started hitting the record button that I got home around 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning last night, you know, texting my wife, don't wait up for me, just please leave a light on. So I'm not walking into a pitch dark house.
You got
But
to
we're
get
not,
those smart bulbs, Brandon.
you know what? We have the smart bulbs, but
Okay.
as much of a millennial as I am, I can't figure out how to make them work. My wife has the keys to the kingdom on those smart bulbs.
Send me your schedule. I'll be over this weekend and we'll figure that out together. We can get
You'll
that done.
preset it
Yeah, that's right.
like the
I'll hook
Christmas
you up.
lights.
Yeah,
Thanks,
exactly.
Eden. So we're talking about that work-life balance, right? And you know, expectations about how do we balance our personal lives and our work obligations as professionals in the local government field. So, I mean, I think a good place to start is Dave. Let's start with you. What makes balance difficult?
I mean, I guess it's a little circumstantial because what we do is so cyclical as far as what our expectations are for being present. I mean, I think we'd all probably agree that we're 24/7 on call. We can get that phone call in the middle of the night. My experience has not been that's been the norm. Thankfully, I think my work life balance for the majority of my career has been manageable. So I think what you need to do, is just make sure that you're staying on top of your mental health and your well being and being there for your families and friends and making time for your social life. And it takes a concerted effort, just like everything else. But for me, anyway, there's been ways I've been able to work around it.
I mean, that's easier said than done for many people,
Sometimes,
right? How
sometimes.
about you, Eden? What do you think?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this topic and how to sort of enter it today. I guess one of the things I want to get out early into the episode is that I think the concept of work life balance is pretty subjective and depends on the person. I think all three of us probably define what work life balance actually is and what our target is differently. Right. Like I would say being a municipal manager is not like a 9 to 5 job, right? Like it's not a 40-hour a week job. Dave sort of brought up,
The
in
on call.
emergency or disaster situations, your phone can certainly ring. I think that that's probably not the norm. Maybe in really big municipalities or really small municipalities where there's either a lot happening or very few hands to do the work. Maybe that happens. But I think in the size communities that we, sort of work in, that's probably not the norm. But I would sort of say that these jobs are kind of like a lifestyle and I try to have balance. And I think my approach is to not let being a township manager be my entire personality. I don't think that it is. I have a lot of interests, a lot of hobbies. I do a lot of volunteering. My entire life is not consumed by my job, but my job is a constant part of my life. And in the way that I approach it, so when people in the world, that you meet or talk to are like, oh, what do you do? I sort of don't like that question because it's not, who I am.
I
I'd
am more
rather them
than the
ask.
job, right?
Right, I'm more than the job, right? I almost prefer the question of like, what are your interests? What do you spend your time doing? Because there's a lot of answers to that, a lot of different ways, that we can go. So that's my opening statement for this episode.
How,
And I'm
how
not
do
sure
you
I
answer
answered your
that
question at all,
question?
but
How do you answer that question, both of you, when somebody says, "What do you do?" Like, oh, you're a
uh,
township manager, you're assistant
I
township manager.
tell the
What do you
same
do?
bad joke every time.
So do I. What
Well, go
Mine
ahead. What
is
is it?
I collect pictures of dead presidents.
man, that's good. That is
Thank
I
you
pretty
just
guys for
good.
pictured
laughing.
somebody's face, and they're just like,
Yeah, they're like,
"What?"
what? You're like an art collector? Really? Like, yeah. How do you what?
You've
That
actually had someone say art collector?
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, no, like
like
absolutely
pictures
not.
of dead presidents.
Uh, uh,
But the reality is, and I said this to our team recently, who is definitely like putting in a lot of hours, some overnights in there, like really going above and beyond in a tough time of year, in a really tough budget process here at Middletown that I've talked way too much about the last several episodes. And I just reminded them, I said, this isn't your whole life. It doesn't need to be your whole personality. You know, I expect you to have lives outside of here and to do the things you need to do to nurture that life, to nurture your other obligations, whether it's your, you know, your spouse, your kids, your parents, whatever the situation may be. Like, make sure that that's a priority too. And I just said sort of out loud, I said, guys, if the township said, hey, listen, we're having a really bad budget year, we're going to cut all of your pay by 50%. Are you still going to come? And they're all like, no. I'm like, exactly. You're not, right? Like, I care about this profession a lot. I am a township manager on purpose. I love what we do. I'm very passionate about it. I think that comes across probably too aggressively at times. But at the end of the day, this is our career. Someday we're going to retire from it. You know, I'd like to think that I'm still going to be involved in the profession in different ways, but like I'm going to pursue other interests and hobbies. I spend my time volunteering now in other ways outside of being a municipal manager. We don't do this for free, right? So don't feel like you need to make it your entire life. Like balance is a good thing.
Yeah. And for me, this one really hits home because unlike Dave, who's a master of Zen over there, I've
Isn't he?
struggled. Well,
He
perception is
is.
everything, right?
That's right. I perceive him to be that.
He look for those who are not watching the video. Dave is just every time I see him on camera, he's just has that Zen quality to him.
Relaxed, calm, poised. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
Well, this
am.
isn't coffee in my mug, gentlemen.
Well, that's why you're a little Zen, right?
That's right.
There you go.
I
It is
I have
coffee,
s
by the way.
I have struggled with work-life balance. Not so much recently, right? That's when you go into the interview and people always ask, which I'm never a big fan of, but it's a norm. They ask you, "What's your greatest weakness?" Right? I usually say work-life
I have
balance.
a canned answer for that too.
Go ahead. What is it?
My canned answer when they say, "What's your greatest weakness?" You always try to turn it into a compliment, right? You shouldn't
Yeah.
be hard on yourself in an interview, right? So I would say, "Well, you know," and this is true. I mean, this is not an untrue statement. I say I study too much. I tend to
Mm.
like want to read everything and study too much and make sure that I understand as much as I possibly can about an issue. And sometimes leadership is about making difficult decisions or, you know, recommendations with incomplete information, which is also true. You know, but
I like
sometimes
that.
I just spend too much time studying and reading.
No, that
That's my I don't know if it's a good answer. I've never gotten feedback about it, but that's my canned
this
answer.
guy thinks it's a good answer,
I
but
appreciate that.
you know, kind of going back, I've really struggled with work-life balance in the past. Granted, I have learned to let go, has been what I'm framing it as since joining Lower Marion. Not that I just disregard duties but I've reprioritized, the things in my life. And I will say, this is my 10th year in local government. 2 years in Lower Marion. I would say for the first 8 years, right, I failed in terms of maintaining that balance. And, still married. So, that it hasn't gotten to that point.
I'm glad to hear that, Brandon. And I will say we have friends and colleagues in this field who can't say that.
Yeah.
You know, who are, you know, I don't know if I want to say this, who are have spent so much time making this career their life that they've lost what life really means, right? They've
Yeah.
lost their spouses, right? They've developed, you know, really toxic, you know, bad traits and, you know, new parts of their personality that maybe weren't there because this field, this industry will chew you up and
Oh, yeah.
spit you out if you let it.
Absolutely. Like there is no holds bar and it will chew you up.
And when it spits you out, they're just going to advertise your job the next day.
Yeah. They have no personal obligation to be loyal to you as an organization, right? Like a personally, right? And, just to go be a little raw and emotional about this, right? There are instances and there are situations that I missed, right? The field hockey games, the, after school events, which, I am still riddled with guilt about because I've missed them because I was at work, not because it was a requirement, which I would consider a requirement now, but back then I considered it a requirement. And boy, how wrong was I, right?
How about
And
anniversaries and birthdays? Those are on my list of things I've missed.
I'm a little bit better on those, right?
Good. Good.
Usually because my wife reminds me, not on the date of the birthday, but she's like, "You're going to do this, right?"
Yeah.
And
That's
you
good.
all have never met my wife, but she's a New Yorker and she can get scary.
Oh man.
But yeah, I have failed for I would say the first 8 years of my career, and really prioritizing, family first, right? And I will say that coming to Lower Marion probably saved my marriage, because even though as busy as we are, the culture is different, right? Like my boss, my current manager, the one day I was telling him, "Hey, can I leave early?" He's like, "Absolutely, of course." Like, and then when I didn't leave when I said I was going to, he like walked in my office. He's like, "What are you doing here? You said you were going to leave. Go." And like really framing that for me.
It's an interesting point about culture. I'm thinking about my days in Ferguson Township, earlier on in my career, and I had a person who worked out in the front window, and she was accruing all this unused vacation, and I went into her office one day and I said, or to her space, and I said, like, why aren't you using this? Like, I get, sometimes people like to, save it, cash it out, roll it over, whatever the case is. But, is there any reason why you're not taking time off? And her response to me was, well, here we've kind of created a climate where it's expected that if I'm going to take time off, that I need to find somebody who's gonna staff the window, and I don't feel like putting that, I don't feel comfortable putting that obligation on one of my coworkers. Hey, I need to take a week off. Can you make sure that you don't take any time off this week so you can be at the ready? And, it was maybe minutes later that I convened, I hit the big emergency, like, manager directive button. I was like, guys, we got all my department heads. We got to get together on this. And I brought everybody into a room and I said, look, this practice of setting an expectation that your direct reports are going to find somebody to cover for them is going to stop right away, because you're having the effect of deterring them from using their leave time, from using their accruals. It's bringing down the morale, it's bringing down productivity, it's having all those negative consequences, that we
Mhm.
associate with work, with a lack of a work life balance. And it really shouldn't be their obligation to find their replacement. That's on you. You're the supervisor. You need to manage your resources, manage your staff, and say, okay, look, John is taking off this week and Joe's going to be here. So, Joe, I'm not going to approve any PTO for you this week. It's not obligatory. You're not expected to approve everybody's time off requests. You're expected to make sure you got the staff and resources at the ready to do your jobs, and give them the ability to do their jobs. And you can't obligate them to do that for you. You've got to take that, heavy lies the crown. You got to take that on yourself.
I have a prompt on that one, but Eden, did you want to share anything in response to what Dave just shared?
No, I think I mean, I'll just highlight one thing I think Dave said that I agree with. It's our job to sort of take care of our teams to establish that culture, and I think establishing a culture of wellness, of, balance, I think is super important. So Dave's got a good story there. I like that.
So let me ask you this. How do we get to that point, right? Like how do we get to a point where, and without casting blame on specific individuals, how do we get to a point where we have this expectation in some organizations where you have to find a cover, or you have to do this, or you have to work long hours, or if you take time off, there's an assumption or a perception that you don't value the job as much. What?
It starts at the top. You got to practice what you preach. There's this old, kind of archaic philosophy in leadership that as a leader of an organization, you need to be the first one there and the last one to leave. And I kind of get where that mentality comes from. But on the other hand, if you have particularly your leadership team, and then by extension, their direct reports all the way through the organization, if you have people that are looking at you and seeing your car first in and last to leave, and they think that that's your expectation of them, that then becomes really difficult to change course on that and to say, no, I want you to take time off. I want you to have a strong work life balance. Well, okay, you say that, but yet I see your car here at 7 o'clock at night every night. You do you really believe that? Because if you did, wouldn't you be following your own prescription?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a good answer there. I think every culture is different. I think it's built over periods of time, over different instances, expectations that are communicated. I think there are some municipalities that are really busy and have a lot of work that they need to get done, and sometimes they're understaffed and under resourced. So, how do you make up for that? You work more, right? So that you can do more. I do think that there's generational differences here. I am not like a generational difference expert. There are people who really understand that much better than I do, but I think that there are generations in the workforce who sort of prioritize and approach work differently than we do. Sort of like I will be here until the job is done, and that's when I will
Yeah.
go home. And they can sort of, they can sort of levy that expectation in an unwritten and unspoken way. I think that that's certainly part of it. I tell my team I'm really good at using my PTO, and I expect them to follow my lead on that. And I try
That's
to
awesome.
support them in making that happen. Like it's not worth making our jobs our entire personality. If we work hard and we get the things that we need to get done and we're moving things forward, take time off, enjoy your life, come back refreshed and ready to go. And I think the other question is, as managers, if we are expecting to accomplish more than what we have the resources to do, and people are part of the resource equation, right? To the point where they are working more than average, right? I mean, if you have a whole team pulling 60, 70-hour weeks because you're trying to get that much done, well, maybe as a manager, you need to step back and ask yourself the question, am I trying to get this team to do too much? Are we resourced appropriately, to accomplish this much? And those are tough conversations with your governing body, but I think that's part of it that
Yeah.
needs to happen.
I think you both hit on really good points, right? I think it is to an extent, not that it applies to everybody, but there is a little bit of a generational thing here, right? Where we have more traditional, conventional, old school managers that have that mindset that first one in, first one out. I've worked for a manager who's like that. 7 o'clock on, they're the first ones in the building. They're the last ones out of the building. If you're driving by the office at night, the office light is on and you could tell that the manager's in there. But also for smaller municipalities, I would imagine it also being difficult. Now, granted, I've never worked for a really tiny one. Dave, I think you said you might have worked for, a relatively smaller one. And there is that expectation, right? Where you only have a few staff. So you're wearing so many different hats, right? The manager is often the zoning officer, also the finance director, also,
I've been in
like
that
animal
situation.
control. Oh,
It's
yeah,
awful,
you did
right?
you had
I've
that too,
been
right?
the manager in those small towns, right? Where you're the borough manager, the zoning officer, the code enforcement officer, the
Animal
borough
control.
secretary, animal control, and you might spend your entire afternoon out literally looking at properties saying, "Okay, these are code violations," writing the letters that need to go out, notice of violations, appearing in front of the district magistrate, and you're like, "I worked all day, but I didn't do any manager things. Like I didn't manage this municipality, prepare the board agenda for, next week or, work on the minutes." And it becomes really easy to get caught doing those transactional things and working a lot. I've definitely been there. And I'm not sure I have good advice for our friends and colleagues who are in those positions. I
Yeah,
will
they don't
say
have
from a
much
professional
choice, right?
yeah, I will say from a professional standpoint, you're getting so much exposure and so much experience as to how different facets of local government operate because you have to do it. That is going to make you a stronger manager when you get into a larger municipality where you have somebody to do everything, which is my experience, right? Like I can relate to my code enforcement officer and my zoning officer in a different way because I've done those roles, at least a little bit in a smaller town. So things get better, I would say, but you still have to have balance. It's hard.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, let's not bury the lead either. I think I'm glad we're talking about, this kind of seismic shift in the workplace that's taken place over a number of generations. And I think
Mhm.
we alluded to in one of our last recordings that we probably have, I think this is true, more generations working in the workforce now than at any other time in human history. So,
It's
at
totally
any
true.
given day, you're
Yeah.
working with Gen Z, Gen X, millennial, boomers. I mean, you've got people from all walks and I often wonder, like Eden, I'm not an expert in gerontology and that kind of stuff, but is it true that the generational expectations of work-life balance are different, or is it just true that in the decades where the previous generations, the Gen Xers, the boomers were coming into their formative professional years, that there just wasn't that quality of life that was provided for in the workplace. And now that the workplace has evolved such that that expectation exists, those generations are saying, well, geez, yeah, absolutely. We want work-life balance. I never really kind of put a lot of stock into the broad generalizations of the boomer or Gen X or millennial generations that say, well, the boomer is the workaholic, the one that's focused wants to be on call 24/7, and the millennial is the lazy, kind of phoning it in, or maybe that's now Gen Z or whatever it might be.
I was gonna say, I think the emergence of Gen Z has taken the
Yeah.
heat off
That's
of some
taking that from
millennials.
us. They've taken the
Yeah.
mantle. Yeah,
Yeah,
good for them.
Eden,
It's a matter of that. That's how the system's evolved, and everybody is now benefiting, I think, from that allowance for a higher quality of life. As government, we're so inhibited in our ability to be competitive with the private sector in a lot of ways. In the compensatory side of the employment benefit piece, and even in the non-compensatory side, the work-life balance. Like we're not most of us are not going to give unlimited paid time off, or our boards aren't going to give unlimited PTO. That's almost an expectation with a lot of these larger corporations and private sector entities now. And so
Yeah.
we need to be competitive where we can be.
Eden, did you go? There was a great session at the ICMA conference in Tampa. I think it was Tuesday. It might have been Wednesday morning, but I know you left early. You left on Tuesday, right?
No, I left Wednesday.
Or Wednesday? It was about working across generations, and it
I think I
talked
went to that. Yeah.
specifically about this. And they had, they put a Gen Zer, a millennial, a boomer, and a Gen Xer, on a panel. And man, like the responses between the four of them and how they interacted with each other was it was really telling, right?
Oh, yeah. Uh,
Absolutely.
I remember being in a workplace situation, saying to my team at 4:30 on a Friday, I said, "Guys, we worked all week. Like we had multiple night meetings this week. Like I know every single one of us worked when we went home at night. Let's go to happy hour before we go home for the weekend."
Nice.
A- And the response was, "Eden, 4:30 on a Friday is a working hour." And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And went back to my office.
Oh,
I was like, are you like, what? Like, if we're not over hour 60 at this point, like, we have to be close.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
just
but
last
that
night,
that was the response. Just a different perspective.
just I was telling you about leaf blowers just last night. At the end of it all, I turned to my boss. I was like, "Hey, do you mind if I come in late tomorrow?" He's like, "No, I kind of expected you to come in late tomorrow."
Yeah,
Right? Like,
absolutely. I know we have students that are listening to this podcast. We hear from them from time to time. And I would say one of the things you need to figure out is what you want your life to be like and kind of plan for that and help that sort of inform your approach to this career and to this role. And understand that as you bring more people into your life, whether it's a spouse, your parents, if you wind up taking care of them, children, that is all going to impact how you approach it, right? Like I have no kids. I'm not married, right? Like my life is flexible in a way that not everyone's is. Certainly not the two of you, right? Like, if I'm working nights, like that negotiation is totally different for me than for you guys, right? I'm not dropping anyone off at school. It's different. So those are things to sort of think about. I said earlier in the episode that I think work-life balance is subjective. I think that there are people, I know there are people in my office who would say, Eden, you don't have work-life balance. Like you were just on a golf trip to South Carolina and you worked every day after the round, like you're on email, like you're producing work product, like you were not off. But I'm okay with that. Like to me, I was like, no, like I definitely felt like I unplugged more than I would if I were in the office. I definitely felt
mhm.
like I came back recharged. Like I don't mind working on the way down, working in the library before the trip gets started, working in the afternoon a little bit. Like to me, that's just me, but that's not for everybody. But I'm only negotiating with myself. If you start getting to a point where you're building out kind of a different infrastructure in your life, you have to negotiate that too.
I'm gonna add the soundbite for the episode, right? So work-life balance. I wanted to dissuade listeners, especially the younger listeners and the students out there, that it this work-life balance is not about time management. For me, it's about boundary management, right? Because you could always make the time work, but it's those boundaries, right? Setting those boundaries up, kind of pulling from one of our previous episodes. Hey, like I value me as a person too. If I need to work late, I will certainly work late, but not unless it's absolutely necessary, right? So I just want to put that out there.
I had the
Boundary
oppor-
management.
I agree. I had the opportunity to hear the CEO of Pico at the time, which is the largest electricity provider in Eastern Pennsylvania, for those that don't know, give kind of a keynote speech. And he was talking about work life balance. And he was being critical of the younger generation, which I didn't love at the moment. But his whole point was it's okay to have balance. It's okay to want sort of work life balance and, have those boundaries. He's like, but it's not every day. It has to be on the aggregate. He's like, it's perfectly okay to work 12 and 16-hour days in situations where that's required, but maybe it's not okay to work 12, 16-hour days every day.
Yeah.
He's like, it's okay not to make it home to dinner with your family one night if you know twice a year you're going to take 2 weeks off work and completely unplug and go somewhere and spend it with your family. He says, you need to figure out what works for you and what works for your family. He's like, but you sort of need to look at it a little bit more globally and not say, okay, it's 5 o'clock, I'm done. Shut the laptop down and we'll start over tomorrow. I didn't agree with everything that he said, but I thought that there were some good points in there worth considering.
But that's a
And
powerful
I try to
point.
think about that, right? Like, if in the heart of my week, I'm getting night meeting after night meeting after night meeting, and I'm negotiating that at home, sometimes I'll be like, well, we did just sort of like take a long weekend or a vacation or whatever, and try to just remember that on the whole, I have a pretty peaceful life that allows me to have a lot of balance.
Yeah, I think you raised something that I want to ask both of you. When you go away on vacation, wherever, do you take your work phone and your laptop? Do you do work while you're out of the office?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, typically, there are times where I'll make it clear, like if I'm going to do something different, if I'm going to entirely unplug, and I always make sure there's some way to get a hold of me in those rare municipal manager emergencies that require immediate attention. But yeah, I'll bring work with me. It's like Eden said, like it's so dependent on the circumstance and the situation and what's going on. I really don't mind. In fact, I mean, you all know this just as well as I do. It seems like for every day you spend unplugged, it takes you at least 2 to 3 days to catch up on what you missed.
Mm.
And whether it's getting caught up on meetings you missed or items that have progressed in your absence, whatever the issue might be, catching up on email. I mean, those things, you don't want to punish yourself when you get back from your little respite by having to spend a week just digging yourself out of email jail. I don't mind spending 20
Yeah, that's true.
minutes at the end of a day on the beach, just kind of catching up on a few things. Like Eden, I when people say, "Well, geez, you don't have a work life balance. Look what you're doing." My response to them is, "Yeah, that is how I balance my work and life. It's just the key word there is balance, and to be able to say, okay, I'm going to work a little bit on vacation, or I'm going to recreate a little bit during the workday. It kind of cuts both ways on that."
Eden?
Yeah, I absolutely travel with all my stuff. First of all, I think in most municipalities of the sizes that we work in, the manager is the de facto director of emergency services, and emergencies do happen, right? If there's an
Yeah.
emergency operations center activation because there's a disaster, I'm going to have responsibilities that I need to fulfill, and that requires my phone and laptop at a minimum. So I'm always traveling with the infrastructure I need, kind of with that disaster emergency mindset. That's number one. Number two, um, it depends on the type of outing I'm taking, right? So my team teases me. They're like, Eden, you don't take a vacation. I'm like, to me, a vacation is a solid week out of the office. Like if I leave Thursday and I come back Tuesday, that's a long weekend. And they're like, Eden, these are like weird rules. Like where did you come up with this? Right? They make fun of me. So it sort of depends. Long weekends, if I'm out, I'll work a little bit, stay on top of email, kind of clear things out. I have an amazing executive assistant who organizes a lot of that stuff for me. I'm very privileged to have that, where she's sending things out, filtering things, that kind of stuff, making sure that I'm only seeing what I need to see. So that works out pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I stay pretty plugged in. Every other year, I try to take a longer trip where I get out of the office and really basically say, if there's a disaster, call me. Otherwise, I'm not signing on at all. And I find that to be pretty relaxing. But I'm one of those people that loves my job, right? Like I love
Mhm.
to work. I love my job. I'm enthusiastic to come to work every day. So it's not like a huge burden for me to like plug in a little bit and just sort of keep track of things that are happening. And it also depends on what time of year, right? Like I have no expectation of sort of unplugging in the fall when we're doing,
Yeah.
budget season, for example. So a lot of different factors there.
Well, I'm glad you said that, Eden, because I understand it's a little bit different for me. You guys are managers. I'm the assistant on the call. So I'm not really, I'm the number two on the spare. Although I will say my manager includes me in every single decision, right? And Lower Marion also benefits from our police chief is actually our emergency operations manager. So that's not a duty that's vested in the manager. But I will say for the first time in my entire professional career, this past year when we took the kids down to Florida was the first time that I completely unplugged, right? I did not bring my work laptop. I did have my work phone, but I told people in advance. It was a promise I made to my wife the year prior because I always took my laptop and kind of, what you said, Dave, check the emails at night and whatnot. And for those in the married and with kids camp, right? Most of the day is spent, family, right? With the kids doing all the stuff. When the kids are in bed, that's when, we have, couple time, right? Like I get to spend, one-on-one time with my wife. We'll, on vacation, we'll either turn something on or we'll just talk about one of the things we want to do that week. And this past vacation, we were gone for an entire week. I didn't check my email once. Granted, the entire time I was on pins and needles because I was like that email jail was a real fear that grew in me. But as the week progressed, it kind of subsided. And man, I was just so rejuvenated, right? I was just so relaxed. And I told everyone they can call me if necessary. Otherwise, I'm not looking at my emails. I too have a great executive assistant. I said, Suzanne, like if anything pertinent or super important comes up, call me. And I have different sounds for different people on my phone. So I know who's calling me by the sound.
Dave and I
Or
want to know what sound we are.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Or
for sure.
who not to pick up
That's right.
when you hear a sound.
There you go.
But I would also just encourage, just try it, right? Whether it's a long weekend or a full weekend. I know it's going to be easier for some than others, but man, I felt so re-energized after that week of just not having to deal and really relaxing.
So here's my hot take. I think it takes more than a week to decompress and actually like get into that Zen mindset.
I
Next
would say
year,
it
Brandon,
depends on the
try doing
person.
that, but take 2 weeks or even a week and a half.
A
Because
week
think
and a
about it.
half.
You finally leave
Right,
work.
the
Let's
wheels
say
have
it's a
turned. Brand's like,
Friday.
Well, I mean, we have a golden rule in the house. The kids can only be in close proximity to each other for 3 days before
God. We'll
yeah,
take a couples retreat or something.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
can't
it's
if you
like
can swing
clockwork.
it. So here, hot take. If you can swing it in your organization with your boss, with your whole situation, if you can try to unplug for 2 weeks, go for it. Do it.
Yeah.
Take 2 weeks, even if you don't go anywhere, right? Like there's nothing wrong with a staycation. Take 2 weeks, just relax, try to unplug. Maybe you spend one day in there in the middle of it working, getting yourself out of email jail if that's something you need to do, and just see what happens. It's a transformative experience, in my opinion. You really
Yeah.
start to just settle in and sort of shed a lot of the burdens that you carry.
Yeah, low
I
I
hanging
highly
I'm gonna
fruit.
try
recommend it.
that.
Are
You
you
should do it.
guys? Well, Eden, maybe this is for you. Do you designate an acting manager when you disappear for a week or two, or
Or is
are
that
you
your
Yeah,
allowed to
someone's gotta
assistant?
be
designate
in
an acting
charge.
manager?
I think my ordinance actually requires that I appoint somebody if I am unavailable over a certain period of time, but I have an assistant township manager who's incredible. So, I have no problem saying Nick is gonna be the point of contact, and letting him do that, and I've done that in previous organizations that I've been in. Yeah.
I mean, Dave, Eden and I am the assistant. Eden has an assistant. For I know you haven't always had an assistant, right? Like I know you had one in Ferguson.
Yeah, I had one in Ferguson. I was the first assistant manager in Ferguson, and then I hired one after I was promoted to manager. And then when I went to Susquehanna Township, I had an assistant manager slash director of planning. So she kind of wore two hats, at least two hats anyway, officially. Livingston, I didn't have a deputy, and I don't have an assistant manager now in my interim role in Bellefonte. So I have kind of seen both sides of it. But even when I did have an assistant, and this was just me, I would try to rotate, who I would give a little time to serve as acting manager. And I was always clear that if there was something that really needed my attention, it was my expectation that they would contact me. But for me, it was about professional development. It was about giving everybody a little perspective about, what we do and the challenges that we have to, overcome in our day to day. Even if I did have an assistant manager, it wasn't always by default that she was both, that she was acting manager in my absence. Just kind of
That's
the way
interesting.
I did it.
Why have an
Interesting.
assistant manager if they're not gonna be sort of your default number 2?
Well, I didn't say they weren't the default number two, but when I would appoint an acting, because my ordinance had always allowed for, latitude on my part to decide who would be acting manager. But if I was leaving, and I would really only do this if I left the state, if I was going to like an APMM conference or if I was going on a vacation where I could be home in a couple of hours drive, I wouldn't even bother with appointing an acting. But
Sure.
I would rotate through, and predominantly it wasn't really so much like a reflection on my confidence or the abilities of the assistant manager to act in my absence, but it was more about, hey, let's rotate through this all, like give you, okay, director of public works, like You sometimes you get a little critical about how decisions are made in this organization, like, kind of put you in that spot, see what you do.
I
Obviously,
think
I'm
if
being a little snarky, but on the other side of that coin, I think it gave everybody a little more perspective organization wide, whereas they may not get it in the day to day, kind of doing a thing.
I've
I
been in
think
that situation.
if I were the assistant manager of an organization and the manager was away and they appointed someone other than me to be the acting manager, I think I'd be pretty offended.
Yeah, that's probably true. I'm sure
Yeah,
that
I've been in
I
that
think I would
he's not
situation,
be
Eden.
wrong.
I think I would be pretty offended.
I was
Um,
in that situation. It was awkward.
You ever think about, I'm glad you said, because you ever have to like reflect back to that scene in The Godfather where, Michael and Sonny Corleone and Tom Higgins are talking, and Sonny's talking to Tom, and he's like, he's taking this very, very personal. This is business, and he's taking it very, very personal. I think about that scene in what we do more than I can admit, or more than I care to admit. And just sometimes I have to, okay, this is business. This isn't personal. So, I mean, in this context, like, it was
yeah, but
never
like
personal. It was
think about
never
the
a fault.
message that you're sending. I don't want to beat this up too much, but think about the message you're sending to the number two. I mean, God forbid if something happened to the number one, tragic accident, they're incapacitated, maybe they are suddenly deceased. Like if I were the assistant manager, I would be saying to the board of supervisors, I am in this role because I was trusted by the now former CAO to be able to keep the wheels on the bus and to manage this organization during a transition, which obviously needs to happen, right? Someone's got to keep it together. Like they need to be able to give the board confidence. Well, if the board member is able to say, well, wait a second, was the manager actually confident in you? If every time they left the state, they actually appointed a different department head to be the acting,
Yeah.
Maybe you had that role because someone needed to fill it, but maybe that was sort of symbolic of their lack of
Yeah,
confidence in you. I mean,
maybe. I mean,
that's really
I
tough.
paint it.
I'm not
I
sure
try
I
to
would have
paint it
done
with
that.
a wider brush. I mean, I'll give you a real example. My finance director in Susquehanna Township, Jill Lovett, she's now the township manager in Dickinson Township and in Cumberland County, and doing a great job. While she had a lot of, I think, exposure to the many things that managers do in her role as a finance director, just by virtue of the many services that department provides. When I took over as manager in Susquehanna, I brought her into a lot of the fold. Not just, and I'm not just necessarily talking about designating her as acting, but I brought her into a lot of the things that maybe historically it was strictly the role of the manager or the assistant manager to be responsible for, whether it's collective bargaining and personnel labor kind of relations, or exposure to the administrative side of the house a little bit. And it was more about on the job training. It wasn't intended to be, nor do I think it was received as offensive to the assistant manager, who was also getting a lot of those same kinds of experiences that I did, that a manager has, and that on the job training and professional development. But it was about, the rising tide raising all ships. And that's what I try to do with my leadership team.
As the assistant on the call, I wouldn't have taken it personally, but it would have hurt, right? Like it would have hurt. But to frame us back to the work-life balance, although I found that whole exchange fascinating as an assistant who's been in that situation where not designated as the acting when the manager's out of the room. Generational, changes, right? We know the workforce is changing. Gen Z is coming into full force into the workforce, right?
I love it. Welcome, Gen Z. Super
Welcome,
happy to
Gen
have
Z.
them.
Welcome. We are no longer the lowest totem on the totem pole, right?
Can I tell you guys something?
Yeah.
So the township manager's office in Middletown, we've changed it a little bit. There's 4 of us. There's a township
heard.
manager, an assistant township manager, an executive assistant, and a PIO. I am the oldest one. I'm 34 years old. I'm the oldest person in the office. I have never experienced that before. All 3 of my team members in my office are younger than me. One is Gen Z, 2 are millennials.
You're the sage, old,
I can't believe
wise
I've never
man.
had this situation. And I also have an incoming elected official in January who is younger than me. I've never had that either.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
I know.
That's
I'm
How does
so
that make
it's
you
so
feel?
much fun. It's so much fun and it's so different. It's really I love it. I think it's great.
Now, let me ask you this. Expectations on their end, right? Regarding the topic, work-life balance. Have you noticed any shift?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How so?
I mean, they're super into balance, right? I mean, their whole personalities are not their job. They have lives, they have interests, they have hobbies. They've got a lot of things going on. We've got kids that are coming, we've got all sorts of different stuff. And we manage it and we talk about it. We talk about it out loud. We actually just recently established a team meeting to discuss everything but work, right? Like, it's so easy for the 4 of us because our team, we're in everything, right? And we're the manager's office, right? But we never sit down and talk about how our office is like functioning, right? Like who's taking off, like who's doing this, like what, just like sort of the daily sort of grind type stuff. So we've set up a team meeting where we're going to talk about nothing that's
Interesting.
happening in the township and everything that's happening in the office that we need to talk about. It's
I
super
actually thought
interesting.
about doing something like that maybe next year for all our assistant directors, right? We have
Yeah.
14 department, Eden, we have 14 assistant, 14 directors, and we have about half a dozen assistant directors, right? With some
Yeah.
departments having more than one assistant director.
Sure.
So I thought about having like that type of, touch base assistance club as I've been
I love
calling
it.
it,
That's a
right?
great. Yeah. That's cool.
And, that session I referenced earlier really touched on, a lot of things that you were saying about the expectations of Gen Z and really not necessarily bucking the norm, but coming in and again, not even demanding, but they are insisting on greater work-life balance. And I think one of the challenges for our profession moving forward in the immediate future is going to be finding that balance
Mhm.
in terms of what do we offer our employees in terms of paid time off, right?
So the one thing that I try not to do, and I think I'm good at this, is I try not to like decide what they think or believe because of their generation. So
Right.
I'm not thinking like, okay, well, what's the Gen Z portion of my team's expectation? I'll just say, Liz, what are your expectations? Miranda, what are your expectations? Nick, what are your expectations? And then I say, these are my expectations, right? Just because a team member has an expectation doesn't mean it's going to be met. And we sort of just talk about it
Yeah.
and, level set and figure it out from there.
But I think, larger, right? Like I don't disagree. And I think knowing individual expectations is important. But I think there are trends, right? There are
Oh yeah,
workforce
there are
trends,
trends for sure.
right? And I
But I don't
think
like to put people in a box. That's what
yeah,
I
I can respect that.
yeah.
Like I know for Lower Marion, we have and I'm not sure if you guys have it, but we have a full work from home policy that we offer all our full-time employees.
We don't have a policy, but we do have a practice that needs to get dealt with.
Well,
And I think this is where I like,
happy to send you our policy if you'd like.
yeah, send it over. I guess I'm different. Like, I obviously work remotely. I feel like we recorded a podcast with me remote, right? But I am much more like, I default to being in person as opposed to default to being
Me too.
remote. And I just think there's so much like water cooler
Mhm.
conversation that happens. And I think that nonverbal communication is like, what is it, 92% of communication or something? I'm sure that percentage isn't right, but like a significant portion of communication is nonverbal. And if you're just remote all the time, you miss that. So I did say that to my team. I was like, guys, I basically expect to see you every day, right? Every work
Yeah.
day. I think remote work can be a part of our lives and to help us achieve balance in different ways. But, there are some policies, some organizations, and some people who are like, oh, well, Tuesday is my remote day. Okay, but if we have like an important meeting on a project that's happening on Tuesday, like you should come in and be a part of the
Yeah.
meeting. And so, in building culture, one of my expectations is we should be here to take care of the township with the expectation that in return, the township will take care of us. And when I say the
Operational
township,
feasibility is a
that's
good
me,
word.
right? Like I have to take care of the team. So
Operational
that's sort of my
feasibility is
philosophy.
two beautiful words,
I like
right?
that.
Operational feasibility,
I like
right?
that.
We offer up to 3 days max. Usually it's 1 or 2. Rarely will we allow a 3-day work from home, but employees sign an agreement, right? Like granted, we have like 500 employees,
Yeah.
full-time employees, so we got to have something tangible, and HR is really great in terms of keeping track, and it doesn't hold you to that indefinitely, right? Like if you have a situation where you need to work from home, whether it's on a temporary basis or a short-term basis, right? Like that doesn't need to go through the whole full policy. But
Sure.
if that's something you really want to bake into your life, your calendar, we have an agreement, and like, all right, Tuesdays or Wednesdays are your work from home days, but understand operational feasibility. If we have like a super important meeting that one Tuesday, you understand that we can call you in or you should come in.
All right.
Right,
So
and
let's
there's
go
reasons
ahead,
for
Dave.
that. I mean, it's got to be codified because there's exposure. One of your staff gets hurt while they're working in their remote office. That's a workers' comp exposure, or it could be if you
Sure.
don't have a policy that addresses that, or how they need to, manage their work environment. Or what if they come at you and say, "Well, geez, I'm working remote half the time. You ought to be responsible for half of my utility bill. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a work, this." So you really do need to, kind of reduce a lot of that to writing. For me, that concept has always been such a, I think, has been so emblematic of the old, paralysis by analysis, proverb where number one, it is inherently inequitable. You are not going to be able to give all your employees, your
Yeah.
cops, your public works department, your refuse, if you have it, utility workers, those guys and gals are not going to be able to work remote. And you just need to, I think, if you're getting serious about making a policy or instituting some kind of remote work program to be attractive in the workforce to some of those those that expect that, you need to lead with that. Hey, look, guys, you're not going to be able to all take advantage of this. It's going to
Yeah.
naturally disadvantage some and advantage others. And if you're willing to, you and of course your council would have to ultimately bless that personnel policy in most cases. They need to understand that and they need to support it. And if they're not, well, then you just can't go down that route. And it's just it creates too much too much of an issue, too much friction within your organization, too many potential exposures. But at the same time, to the degree you can accommodate it, I've always been of the mind that you should. There are some jobs that not in all circumstances, but there are some jobs that can do perfectly fine working a couple of days remote. Eden's absolutely right. So much of the value in an organizational culture is at that water cooler. A lot of the best innovative ideas, a lot of the best conversations take place in the hallway on your way back from the bathroom. You need to be able to allow for that. So I've always been, a kind of walk and chew gum at the same time kind of manager when it comes to remote work. You have to have that expectation that they're present sometimes. You also have to have that expectation that you can claw it back for the ones that are abusing it. So it's tricky.
Not that I want to keep pulling back from my epic long meeting last night, but one of the other things that I think we can all be a little bit proud of on the Lower Merion team is that last night we also got a 12-week paid parental leave policy put in place
Right.
for all full-time eligible employees.
Yeah.
Right. And that's in addition to all the other, and I will say Lower Merion offers a generous PTO for, sick and vacation and all that. But this is going to be 12 weeks of paid parental leave. And
So that's for both the birthing and non-birthing parent?
for birth and non-birth. And it also includes adoption and
Adoptions.
fostering.
Yeah.
Nice. That's
So
great.
I've often
love it.
joked it's 12 weeks upon receipt of the child. So, it's once you have the child, one way or another, you get to use 12 weeks.
That's
And
amazing.
you could use them in 2-week increments.
So now you're a heavy collective bargaining municipality. Did you apply this into all of your contracts? Did they negotiate for it? How did that work?
Oh, thank you for as large as we are, we only have 2 unions. We have the FOP and we have essentially Workers Association, who's everyone else.
I thought you had like 6.
No, that was a past story. Norristown had 7.
Norristown had 7. So you only have 2 collective bargaining
We have the
associations?
FOP and everyone else.
Wow.
But that represents a majority of your workforce.
Oh yeah, like the Workers Association are all our clerks, all our refuse guy, all our.
Are they
outdoor
locally
clerks.
organized or are they represented by like the Teamsters or
No, they're locally organized.
locally? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean they're a great bunch, right? But yet we did it outside of negotiations. This was a benefit that our board wanted to offer outside, regardless. It was a gift, quote unquote.
Yeah, that makes
With
sense.
no
That's great.
catches. We didn't ask for anything.
Love it.
And, it was interesting because the FOP had 2 weeks of paid parental leave in their contract. And we said, hey, they want to offer 12. Granted, there are terms and conditions, right? Like
Right.
you have to work for the township for a year after using the leave. You
That
can't
makes sense.
voluntarily leave, right? Like if there's a medical condition and you can't come back, we give you a pass. But if you say, yeah, I just don't want to work anymore, you have to pay that leave back. Yeah, it's 12 weeks of paid parental leave. It was so, and I will say it is a hefty thing. I will give all the kudos to our HR department for really kind of looking at every single scenario.
That's great.
But we have MOUs with both unions saying, yep, we accept this as is outside of negotiations. And we understand that, and the police gave up their 2 weeks and said, hey, we're going to go with this policy for 12.
Okay.
And it has been, granted, we approved it last night, but we're already getting inquiries into it. And not only is it the right thing to do to kind of meet that expectation and live up to the moment, but we also are pretty confident that it's going to be a good recruiting tool.
I think it's going to be a great recruiting tool. We did something not as generous. I think it was 12 weeks for the birthing parent and 6 weeks for the non-birthing parent in Kennett. And that policy was shared widely. A lot of people were sort of referencing it. And, there was pressure on a lot of the neighboring municipalities from their employees to say, hey, Kennett's doing this. Why can't we?
Happy to share
I
our
think that's great.
policy.
Yeah.
Just
Congratulations.
need a finder's fee.
Definitely low risk, high reward. I mean, it really doesn't hurt the organization too much in terms of overtime exposure. You find a way to manage those resources, you find a way to get through their absence, and it's like the dividends it pays are huge. I mean, you're right.
And don't we want to support our employees and their families and their new children and everything that comes with that? Right. I
Right.
mean,
I
there's
mean,
so
is it
much research out there that talks about the importance of those early days and frankly, early years, of infancy and childhood. I mean, we should be wanting to support that. That's what life is all about. Right. And we talk about work life balance this episode. I mean, I say to my teams all the time, when you reach the end of your life and you're laying somewhere, sort of breathing your final breaths and you're surrounded by your loved ones, you're not going to think to yourself, gosh, I wish I worked, right? Like that's not going to happen.
And, on that note, we are approaching the hour, but, I will, make the comment that, yeah, it's all about balance and integrating work and life. And I mean, it's a struggle for a lot of people, but, you know, I think the important thing is you got to set up your boundaries and, don't hesitate to reach out to, if you have a Dave or and a need in your circle, talk to them about it.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're listening to this episode thinking, man, I've really, this was profound that I need to be better at having boundaries, start today. Start today. Write that new chapter today. You don't have to wait.
Yeah. Great. I think that's a great line to end on. Dave, I wanted just, do you have anything to add?
I'd add just, I think we are fortunate in our profession to have, the latitude to kind of draw our own path in many cases when it comes to balancing work and life. There are other professions that service that service the public sector that don't have that luxury in many cases. Law enforcement, fire. I know Eden, you're a volunteer firefighter, so you're giving up a lot of your time that's you could be using to recreational public works. We're not out plowing snow in the middle of the night when when some of our men and women that work for us are out there doing that work. So I just want to tip the cap to those men and women that are doing that work at all hours, 365. In many cases I think we are in positions that are in fortunate positions where we can dictate some of those terms maybe more so than what they're allowed to. So just hats off to the work they're all doing.
Awesome. And on that note, thank you, everybody. That concludes this episode. Thanks for listening to Generation on the Rise. I'm Brandon, joined by Dave and Eden. Catch you on the next one.